So how do you fix these problems? I've talked about the problems that I see teams make, the mistakes I see teams make as they give presentations on their results. How do we fix this? Well, I've already given you some hints, but let's walk through the different things you want to make sure you are doing as you prepare your presentation. And the first one of these is that you really want to know who your stakeholders are and what they want and what's important to them. So this means you need to be interviewing your stakeholders, and this should be done before you start the research, hopefully, and also several points throughout as you get your results and prepare to present them. So who are the stakeholders that you're going to be presenting to? Interview them and practice what we call active listening as you interview them. So if you ask them a question like, what's really important to you? What are the questions you would like this research to answer? And then they talk about it. You need to reflect back to them what you believe they just told you so that you can be clear on it, so that you are sure that you understand what's important to them. And then you're going to take those words that they said during that interview in that meeting, and those words are going to appear on slides, for instance, or in the report of your presentation, so that they will hear exactly the words they said to you. And that will make them feel, A, that you listened to them, and B, that this presentation and these results are really addressing their issues and their questions and their concerns. Another way to avoid these problems, another thing you want to do is give your stakeholders options about the presentation. So these options might include, do you want this presentation just for you? Do you want us to, after we give you this one, do we want to work together on another presentation that you're going to give? You might have options about, you might ask them, how much detail do you want in this presentation that I give you? Do you want to see all the data? Or should we do a 20-minute presentation where I just give you the insights and the recommendations, and then we can pour over the data later? I mean, go ahead and ask them what it is they would like in the presentation. We mentioned we were talking about problems, about if the stakeholders are going to be themselves presenting, or they're going to ask you to come in and present to a different group of people, either higher up or outside of the stakeholder group that you worked with. So this is something you want to make sure you do, is find out, how is this presentation going to be used? How many different kinds of presentations will be needed? Or at least let them know, as you are doing the research and preparing the results, that this is an option that you can talk about later. If they are going to be giving the presentation themselves, a version of the results to other groups, then help them with that. And ask them, would you like me to work with you to create a presentation of part of the results for this group, or a smaller summary for the presentation you give? So offer your services to help prepare that presentation for them. I've been talking all along about making a presentation, and the reason is that I believe you should make a presentation. So I've seen some situations where teams prepare reports. They prepare reports that they then send to their stakeholders to read. And I'm sure there might be a situation in sometime, somewhere, where maybe that's appropriate, but I would really question that. I think a presentation is always critical and important. And even if you do give a written report, you want to give a presentation so that they understand the written report. So I think it's a mistake to just kind of hand over a written report without talking about it and without talking it through. So you want to always do a presentation, even if you do a separate written report. You want to make sure at the beginning of your presentation that you give the punchline right away. So don't hide the punchline. And what do I mean by that? A lot of times when we're doing user research, not always, but a lot of the times, we have kind of tough news to give them, especially if this is a product that they like, or they were in on the development of initially, and it has user experience problems, and your research results are going to point that out, and they may not be happy about it. And so there's sometimes a tendency to bury, or hold back the punchline, or another phrase is bury the lead, right? So you start the presentation with all these positive, wonderful things that came out of the study, how everyone understood this and everyone understood that. And then after you go through all the positive things, kind of in the middle, you start to tell them all the horrible bad news. And, well, why is that a problem? Well, because you've started off with all this positive stuff, and they're thinking, hey, not too bad. Okay, we won't have to make too many changes. And all of a sudden it morphs into this other thing where there's lots of problems, and they have a big mess on their hands, and you didn't prep them for that. So if I have bad news, which I usually do, for bad news from their perspective, I say it right up front. So the first thing that we do, you can say, one sentence of what went well, and then you have to give them the bad news. Now you can give it to them very short. So for instance, I might say, here, we're going to talk today about the results of the card sort, and at a very high level, what we found is that there's some parts of the navigation system that users understand. However, there are some critical parts of the information architecture that are very problematic, and users did not understand where to go to do critical tasks. So now I've summarized everything up front. So now they're prepared. Now they're ready. They're like, okay. Okay, so there's a few things that are okay, but obviously there's some stuff that has to be fixed, right? You want to make sure you do that up front and early. I teach a lot about how important stories are. In fact, there's a whole brain science behind stories. Stories are the natural way that our brains process information, and you should definitely make use of stories in your presentation about your research results. And there's a couple ways to do this. For one thing, the whole process of how you did the research is a story. Tell the story. If there's a reason that, maybe there was some huge error and some big problem, and that's why you were asked to do the research. So tell the story. Say, as you know, there was a mistake made by the appraisers in appraising some properties that led to the company losing money because the properties weren't appraised correctly, and it was believed that this might be because of the appraisal form. And so we did research on the form, and today we're going to present the results and show you how we can change the form to make sure that error doesn't occur again. So now we have this story. There was this happened, and here's the problem, and then here's the resolution, right? So you want to use a story that way, just a story about the research and how you did it. You can also tell a story about the plans for the research. So we got a committee together, and we came up with, we decided on the type of research to do, and then we worked with the group to figure out what the questions should be, and you kind of can tell the story of how you did the research. And now when it's time to give the results, you can tell the story of what, for instance, your participants did. Instead of just reporting on the data, and instead of just saying that 20% of participants successfully completed this task, right? And so on. You can tell the story of what a particular user did. You can say, here's a typical we tested 10 people, and for many of them, here's how they went about answering that question and using the form. They would start, here's a typical example. This is participant number 20, and what they did was they started here, and then they asked this question, and they were trying to figure this out. And so you can go through what the participant did as a story and say that was very typical. Many of the participants did this. And so you can talk about the research and the results of the research in a story format. Now, I'm not saying, you shouldn't also present data, like what percentage of people did this or that. You can present some of the data as well, but you should always have one or two stories. And if you can include, if it's like, for instance, a user test, and you can include quotes from a particular user, here's what, one of the participants said, and then you have the quote. If you can show a video, a highlights video, and that's kind of like showing the story of what the participants did. Anything to make it more story-like will make your results much more impactful, and your stakeholders will get it. They'll understand. If they hear it in the participants' own words, they'll get it in a way that they won't get just looking at data in a table. So story is very important to make sure your presentation has impact. You want to make sure that you know who your primary stakeholder is, and you want to make sure that you make that person look good. So what the heck do I mean by that? I like to think of when I do user research and when I mentor people in doing user research, I tell them to always think about it as though their stakeholders are their customers, and because they are, right? They are purchasing, whether or not money's changing hands doesn't matter. They're purchasing your services as a user researcher, and so they're a customer. And so if they're a customer, you want to always make them look good. So here's what I mean by that. Let's say that you have a couple stakeholders, 3 or 4 stakeholders that you're doing the study for, and you're now giving the presentation to them. But the way you frame what you're doing, for instance, you talk about the fact that, this product should not have been released with these user experience problems in it. Well, if one of the people in the room is your primary stakeholder and he's the one that released that product, you have now made him look bad. So you need to know, first of all, who is the primary stakeholder, and the whole team, your research team, needs to agree that this is the most important person, and whatever we do, we have to make this person look good. And then you need to frame what you're saying, your insights and your recommendations, in a way that makes them look good. It's not that they released a product with a lot of errors. It's that they are so smart and forward-thinking to do this research to make sure there aren't any problems, and if there are problems, to fix them to improve the product. So you can always frame things in different ways, and you want to make sure you're framing and presenting so that the primary stakeholder is seen to be a hero. There are 2 reasons for this. One is you'll probably get more research work from that primary stakeholder if you do that. And 2, you will allow them to listen and to decide to fix the things you're talking about, because they won't get defensive. If they get defensive, if they feel that they're being made to look bad, then they're going to close down and they're not going to pay attention to the recommendations that you're making. You want to make sure that you're not surprising your primary stakeholder. So this is especially important if it was just the two of you, you as the sole researcher and the stakeholder as the sole stakeholder, and you're having a conversation about the results, then you don't have to worry about this, that much. But if there are many of you, if you have a team of researchers and if you have a team of stakeholders, you want to make sure you're not surprising your primary stakeholder. So if there's something really a big problem that came up in the data, you may want to talk to your primary stakeholder about that before you finish your presentation and before you give your presentation. You may want to take them aside and say, look, I'm working on the presentation and I just wanted to give you a heads up that it's a really strong finding and it might really surprise people. And I wanted to talk about how we present it to the group when we make our presentation, because you don't want to have them be in a room and all of a sudden find out something big and all their peers are looking at them and going, are you kidding? I can't believe this is happening. You don't want to blindside your primary stakeholder, especially. So if there are big, serious considerations that are coming out of the research, it'd probably be best to have a one-on-one conversation with that person and ask them about how they want that to be presented. Now, when I've done this, I've had some primary stakeholders say, okay, we should talk about it, but let's not make it seem like the end of the world. And I've had other stakeholders that say, yes, I thought that was the problem. I actually had one person say to me, hit them over the head with it, meaning make sure that comes out really strongly in the presentation. So, you want to work with your primary stakeholder, especially if there's lots of other people in the room, so that they are not surprised if you're presenting particularly strong results. One thing you might want to think about as you're preparing and delivering your presentation is presentation skills. And that's not the topic of this particular course, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it. But there are certainly things that you can do from your tone of voice, from the way you speak, your hand gestures, your body language, your not having too small a font on your slides and so on. Lots of things that will make you a more powerful presenter. So if you feel like your presentation skills need some work, then I really recommend you check out ways to improve your presentations and make sure that you are doing the best presentation possible, both in terms of planning your presentation and in terms of delivering it effectively. So make sure that you check that out. If you feel that's not necessarily one of your strengths, it will always help to be a better presenter when you're doing presentations of your research results. And the last recommendation that I have for you about presenting your results is make sure that you finish with two things. One is a very specific list of changes that they should make, recommendations that you are making to them that are really specific, so they know exactly what to do. They know that what they should do is change the button on that form. Then they know that what they should do is fix this information architecture in the way you explain to them. So make sure that you summarize those action steps for them at the end. That'll make it easy for them to take the action steps. The other thing you want to make sure that you do is let them know what piece of other research they should consider doing. Now, maybe there's nothing that they need to consider doing, but usually when I'm doing user research, there's always more user research that they should be doing that, there's limited time and budget, so they didn't do. But suggest to them, the next thing you might consider doing is, a user test with this target audience. Or the next thing you might consider, if you didn't do a user test, you did some other kind of research, maybe the next thing they should consider is doing a user test. Or maybe the next thing they should do is make these changes and then test again. I mean, whatever the next piece of user research is, I think you should always recommend that. People don't realize that that user research should be an ongoing thing. And so you need to suggest to them that it is and what the next piece might be. I hope you have found this course on how to present your research results to be useful, and I hope you'll try out some of these ideas. You may already be doing some of them, but perhaps not all of them. And I would encourage you to pick one or two of the ideas you've heard about that you perhaps haven't tried yet, and try implementing them on your next user research presentation. I think you'll find it will help you to present more confidently. It'll help your results to be better understood, and it will thereby help your research to have more impact and more influence in your organization.